My name's Ken Mitchell, and I'm from Aqualis Coatings in Melbourne. We're a company, Australian owned, and we make the product there. Or what I should say is the range of products within the Aqualis name. It's a totally different type of coating from what you've probably been used to selling. So, from my point of view, the way I always start with people is forget what you know, because it's now a new style of coating that's coming in. I'm not suggesting that any of these other coatings on the market, whether it be Intergrain or the Cabot's range or Sikkens or any of the others, there's anything wrong with them. It's just that this is now the new generation which is coming through. The difference with this coating and any of the other water-based style coatings and most of the solvent-based coatings like the Sikkens is that they are all primarily a surface coating, which leaves them open to an easy degradation through water, moisture and other contaminants that will then cause them to pop. And it's an age-old problem that most people have. This is a different product in that it buries itself into the timber, creates an anchor point, and then you start to layer up from there and you get a nice surface coat finish as you go through. The other thing with the coating is that it's designed so that when you put your coatings on or your layers on, it is then designed to stay that way. So it is a transparent product when you put it on, and it remains transparent for the life of the coating. If you find that after a period of time, which we'll talk about a little bit later, that it's time for a recoat, it's not a sand, it's just a wash, and then it's a recoat. And this has created a whole new ball game for most of the deck restoration industry, in that they're now really starting to make some money, because they do their initial work where they do their sanding, they do everything they've got to do. Once they put the H2Oil on, it then becomes an easy process for them just to give it a quick wash, let it dry, and then put one or two recoats over the top. They move on to their next job. The client's back on the deck that same day, putting all his furniture back, and everything's rosy. And it all looks nice and transparent again, nice and clear, very even. Even if you have some pigment dropout, what we call pigment dropout, and that is it might start to fade a little bit in certain areas because it's getting more sun than the rest. It then just, once you've recoated, it all balances back out again, so you don't have any issues. The thing with when you look in your books, we basically talk about know your timber. Now, the thing with the H2Oil is that we don't care what timber you put it on. Couldn't care less. Some of the products have issues with some of the Australian hardwoods like spotted gum, because it's such a tight weave, and because of the resins that are in there, it'll help to basically resist the coating to stick to it. But from our perspective, we don't care. Couldn't care less which timber you use. Now, the way we do it is we ask people to clean their deck before they'll do an install. So, from that regard, if we're talking about a new deck, we're talking about doing a stage 1 and stage 2. Now, the stage 1 is a product we call Timber Clean, and this has a particular product in it that'll pull out tannin, resins, oils. It'll actually emulsify it and get rid of it. And a good example is, these were the boards that the guys had when they got them. That's what it was finished like. That's what it looked like when it was finished. The Timber Clean, if you're talking about things like Kapur, Merbau, it absolutely rips the tannin out of it, and it almost ends up looking like a slaughter yard. And the reason for that is it's the ingredient that we put in there that makes all the difference, and it attacks it straight away. Does it get it all out? No, it can't. So, but it gets out what you need or what the clients need for it to be gone, so that they're not worrying about extra tannin bleed going onto their nice tiles and things like that. It takes it out straight away. What you then do is the stage 2, which is what we call the timber prep. Now, we don't do a pure oxalic, we do a combination of oxalic and citric. And the reason for that is a lot of people, when they're washing up against walls, they tend to spread it all over the place. And what it does when it gets onto walls, whether it's a timber wall or whether it's a masonry wall, it'll basically brighten it. And you'll end up with either blotches or you'll end up with layers of this nice, clean, bright finish. So what we do is we reduce the oxalic in it and we replace that with citric, which doesn't do that. Now, when we're talking about new decks, we do stage 1, stage 2. If you're talking about an older deck where you've done sanding and it's all looking pretty good, if you want, you only need to use the stage 2, which is the oxalic, and all it does is it really brightens it up and gets it going. Now, there are other cleaners on the market. This is a little bit different because of what we do with the combination of the citric and the oxalic. And we think it's priced very well as well compared to some of the others that are floating around. What we do, once you've cleaned your deck, it's important from our perspective you let it dry. We don't want anybody putting any of our products on a wet deck. Now, when I'm talking about dry, it doesn't have to be 100% through dry, but we need that surface area to be dry so that it can bury itself into the timber, because if it's wet, it'll act as a barrier and it won't allow the coating to bury itself. So it is important to do that and let it go through. I'll do a bit of a demonstration in a minute with the coating, but we do a couple of different ways of coating. One, you can either just apply the product directly from whichever colour you want, whether it be natural, Jarrah, Western Red, Light Oak, any of them, American Walnut, or you can do it with putting down what we call the timber seal, which is basically a primer. And what that does is it buries itself into the timber. It's not a surface preparation at all. It'll bury itself in, and then the H2Oil will attach itself to that timber seal. The reason for it is also a tannin block. So, especially on your redwoods, it's great to put down to create that extra barrier of being able to block any tannin from coming out. Because one of the things that happens with merbau, if people, you can tell them till the cows come home, but they don't take any notice. You put a pot down and they don't put feet underneath the pot. So there's no airflow coming through. And what happens is it stays constantly wet, and the tannin then starts to draw itself to that wet spot. And then it starts to come to the surface, and once it's done that, that's it. It's all over red road. It doesn't matter how good you are, you cannot get rid of it. It'll still be there forever. There are ways that we can disguise it, which I'll talk about, but essentially what you're trying to do is to stop that from happening in the first place. Do we still want them to put their pots and everything else with feet underneath? Yes, because the more airflow you can get going on, the better it is. The same applies with decking. The more airflow there is underneath the deck, the longer the coating will last. Because moisture is no friend of timber. It will rot it. So from there, with the timber seal, it's great to put it down. You then don't need to put 3 coats, because we do recommend 3 coats of colour. But with the timber seal, we basically say 1 coat of that and two top coats of colour. And then that's it, it's done. You will see a difference between the finish of a 3 coat and a 2 coat with the timber seal. The timber seal is a cleaner look, and on things like spotted gum, it's brilliant. It really highlights the beautiful different colours, especially if you've got something like a New South Wales or even a Queensland spotted gum where there's a lot more colour variation in each of the boards. and it works really well. So I'll show you that too in a sec, so you can see that you'll be able to see the difference. The other thing is too, when you're applying with all the deck restoration guys, the comments we always get back is when you're just putting the 3 coats of H2Oil on, they always notice more of a resistance on that first coat, and that's natural because you're on a bare timber grain, so you're going to get more resistance from the applicator that you're using. Once they've used the timber seal, which tends to go on a lot easier because it's really thin and it's designed to completely penetrate, not surface dry, when they come to put their coats over the top, it tends to glide a lot easier, and they're able to get more square metres per litre than you otherwise would. And that, from our point of view, that's fairly important, because we tend to say that, and we know for a fact, that you can, but not just necessarily your first coat, when you start on your second and your third coat, you're getting up around the 16 to 18 to 20 square metres to the litre. And it's a huge difference when you start talking about the cost of what it is per litre. So, and people are just getting to the stage out of a 10 litre can, for argument's sake, we're getting up around about 150 to 160 square metres without any issues. Okay, so most people will basically tell you that they'll get about 10 to 12, and that's their number. Now, maybe they can get a little bit more or a little bit less. Sometimes, even from us, if it's a really old, dry, north-facing, fully exposed timber that's been down for about 10 years, hasn't had a lick of paint on it or a coating on it in the last 5 to 6 years, it's going to suck it in like there's no tomorrow. And there's not much you can do about that. That's just what it is. But what we do know, that after that first coat, we then get that beautiful glide, and it'll start to go, and you start to build your numbers back up again per square metre, per litre. So it works really well. The other thing we have is, which I've got here, is what we call deck bright. Now, deck bright is primarily used when you come to do a recoat. It's just pure detergents. There's no acids, nothing in it whatsoever, and it's designed so that if you've already had your coating down for the last 18 months or so, and you want to do a recoat, no sanding required, you just give it a good wash with this, and dry it and recoat. It's as simple as that. And that works really well because, as I said, there's no acids in it, it's just pure detergent. So even if people have got food stains, barbecue stains, it'll take it all off and away you go. Now, I want to sort of come back from where we were, and that is where I said on an older deck, you only need to use the timber prep, which is the oxalic. There is a need for the stage 1, which is the timber clean. If somebody has put down an oil, a solvent-based oil, and they no longer want to do it, they want to put the H2Oil on. What you do with it is you wash it with the timber clean. And what the timber clean does is it emulsifies the oil. So whatever oil is left on the surface or just under the surface, that's all we're worried about. I couldn't care if there's anything further down, that makes no difference to us. But what is on the surface and slightly under, that will get rid of it. It'll pull it out. Now, if you've got some of these older solvent-based oils where they're all pigmented and they've dried out and you're left with all the residue of the pigment, normally they'll go through, give it a quick sand, and then that pretty much gets rid of that very easily. But it's what still could be under the surface that pulls it out. Now, we generally make it a bit stronger, and we turn around and basically say, we call it the extreme. So do it at 4 to 1, 4 parts water to 1 part solution. And that's generally enough to to rip it out. Then just do your oxalic and brightens it up, and then away you go again.